For most of human history, ownership meant survival. If you owned land, you ate. If you owned tools, you worked. If you owned gold, you moved freely. Ownership wasn't philosophical, it was physical, it was visible, and it was respected, because taking it openly led to revolt. But something changed, not suddenly, not loudly, and not by accident. Today, almost everything you think you own exists only because someone else allows it. Your house, your bank balance, your business, your retirement, even your digital identity. You're told you live in the most advanced system in history, that ownership is safer than ever, that laws protect you. But history tells a very different story. Because every time a system becomes unstable, ownership becomes the first thing quietly redefined. Not confiscated at first, not seized with soldiers, but reshaped through rules, taxes, permissions, and compliance. Let's start with something simple: land. In ancient Rome, land ownership was the foundation of citizenship. If you owned land, you had political rights. If you lost land, you lost status and protection. By the late Roman Empire, as debts exploded and wars drained the treasury, land ownership didn't disappear. It was conditioned. Property taxes rose. Debts were enforced aggressively. Small landowners were crushed by obligations they couldn't meet. Eventually, many owners became serfs on land they technically still owned, but could no longer control. Rome didn't take land by force first. It priced people out of owning it. Fast forward to medieval Europe. Feudal lords didn't need to confiscate property outright. They imposed obligations, dues, and permissions. You could live on the land, you could farm it. But true ownership belonged to the crown or the lord. If you failed to comply, the land stayed. You didn't. Ownership became conditional on loyalty. Now jump to a more modern example. In 1933, during the Great Depression, Americans believed they owned their gold. It was legal, it was constitutional, it was money, until it wasn't. Executive Order 6102 made private gold ownership illegal overnight. People weren't asked, they were ordered. Turn in your gold, or face fines and prison. And here's the part most people forget. The government didn't steal gold by force, they used law. They redefined ownership. Once gold was collected, the dollar was devalued, and the state instantly became richer, while citizens became poorer. Ownership vanished with a signature, and people complied, because the system told them it was temporary, necessary for stability. That excuse never goes away. Now look at the 20th century. In the Soviet Union, private ownership was labeled immoral. Property belonged to the people, which really meant the state. Homes, businesses, farms, all technically owned by citizens but controlled by bureaucrats. Miss a rule, say the wrong thing, lose favor. Ownership disappeared, not through theft, through revocation. The same pattern repeated in Maoist China. Land reforms promised fairness. What followed was mass seizure, forced collectivization, and famine. People didn't lose ownership because they were criminals. They lost it because systems under stress need control. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. You don't need communism for this to happen. You just need debt. Modern governments are buried in it. Trillions in obligations they cannot repay honestly. So they do what every empire before them has done. They quietly move from ownership to permission. Let's talk about property today. Do you really own your home? If you stop paying property taxes, what happens? It's taken. Doesn't matter if it's fully paid off. Doesn't matter if it's been in your family for generations. Miss payments long enough? It's gone. That's not ownership. That's a subscription. And property taxes only rise. Why? Because land can't flee. It's the easiest asset to trap. Now apply the same logic to money. Your bank account isn't money you own. It's a liability of the bank. They owe you access until they don't. Bank holidays, withdrawal limits, account freezes. These aren't theories. They've already happened. In Greece in 2015, citizens woke up to capital controls. Daily withdrawal limits, transfers blocked, savings trapped. In Canada in 2022, bank accounts were frozen for political reasons. No trial, no warning, no crime required. Ownership was conditional on obedience, and people were shocked because they believed ownership still meant control. But systems don't work that way once they're stressed. Now think about digital assets, your photos, your data, your identity. You don't own them. Platforms do. They can delete accounts, erase histories, lock you out of your own life with one click, and soon, money will be no different. Cashless systems remove the final layer of ownership illusion. No physical asset, no bearer instrument, no escape. Every transaction tracked, every balance permissioned, every asset revocable. This isn't about efficiency, it's about leverage. When systems are stable, ownership feels real. When systems crack, ownership becomes optional. And history is brutally consistent on this point. Empires don't survive by protecting individual ownership. They survive by controlling it. This isn't fear-mongering, it's pattern recognition. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Because the question isn't if ownership will be redefined again. It's who gets to keep it and who doesn't. Ownership doesn't disappear all at once. That's the mistake most people make when they think about confiscation. They imagine soldiers, raids, seizures, violence. That almost never happens anymore. Modern systems learned a more effective method. They let you keep the appearance of ownership while removing the power that comes with it. The shift is subtle, and once it's complete, reversing it is nearly impossible. Look at housing again, but this time through a modern lens. In the United States, home ownership is promoted as the foundation of the middle class. You're told buying a house is freedom, security, stability. But the truth is more fragile. If you stop paying property taxes, the state can take your home. If zoning laws change, you can lose value overnight. If regulations tighten, your land becomes unusable. You may hold the deed, but the state holds the leverage. This isn't theoretical. In the early 20th century, as cities expanded and governments needed revenue, property taxes quietly transformed land into a permanent revenue stream. Ownership became conditional on continuous payment. Miss enough payments, and centuries of ownership history vanish. The same logic applies to businesses, licenses, permits, compliance rules. A business doesn't fail because it's unprofitable anymore. It fails because it loses permission. During the COVID lockdowns, millions of businesses learned this in real time. Restaurants, gyms, retail shops. They didn't go bankrupt because customers vanished. They were ordered to stop. Ownership existed on paper. Operation existed only with approval. This is a turning point in history. For the first time, governments proved they could shut down private enterprise at scale, instantly. And once a power is proven, it's never forgotten. Now let's talk about something even more personal. Retirement. Most people believe their retirement accounts are untouchable, protected, sacred, their future. But history doesn't support that belief. In Argentina, private pension funds were nationalized in 2008. Citizens didn't lose money immediately. The government promised stability. Then inflation ate the value. Ownership stayed on paper while purchasing power vanished. In Hungary, private pension assets were absorbed into the state system in 2010. Citizens were told it was voluntary. Those who refused lost future benefits. Ownership was replaced with coercion disguised as choice. And in every case, the justification was the same. Crisis, stability, emergency. Ownership is always the casualty of emergencies. Now look at bank accounts. Legally, a bank deposit is not your property. It's an unsecured loan to the bank. You are the creditor. And creditors take losses in crises. That's not an opinion, that's law. After 2008, bail-in frameworks were quietly implemented across Europe and other developed economies. The logic was simple. If banks fail again, depositors absorb losses. Not shareholders, not executives. Depositors. Your ownership becomes capital for system survival. That's not ownership, that's exposure. And once cashless systems are complete, that exposure becomes total. No alternative store, no physical withdrawal, no private exit. Your entire financial existence remains inside a structure you don't control. And control is the true definition of ownership. Now consider digital ownership, music, movies, books, software. You don't own them, you license them, access can be revoked, content can disappear. Entire libraries can vanish overnight. This was unthinkable 30 years ago. Today, it's normal. People accept it because it's convenient. And that's how every ownership shift succeeds. Convenience first, control later. The same transition is happening with money, with identity, with assets, with speech. The state doesn't need to seize anything physically anymore. It just needs to update permissions. In China, social credit systems already demonstrate how financial access can be tied to behavior. Missed payments, say the wrong thing, associate with the wrong people. Restrictions follow, travel bans, transaction limits, access revocation. Ownership becomes behavioral, and once behavior determines access, ownership ceases to exist in any meaningful sense. This isn't limited to authoritarian systems. Western democracies are adopting the same infrastructure, just slower and with softer language. Financial transparency, compliance, anti-money laundering. Know your customer rules. Each rule sounds reasonable in isolation. Together, they create total visibility. And visibility creates leverage. Once leverage exists, control follows. History shows that when debt reaches unsustainable levels, systems must extract value from somewhere. They can't tax the poor, there's nothing left. They can't openly confiscate the rich, that sparks revolt. So they target ownership structures that can't move. Property, savings, pensions, small businesses, assets that feel private but are trapped. That's why ownership always erodes from the middle outward. And that's why governments will never let you own anything again in the way ownership once meant. Not openly, not violently, but quietly. Through rules, through conditions, through permission. And most people won't notice until ownership becomes something they used to have. By the time people finally realize they don't truly own anything, the system has already finished restructuring around them. That realization doesn't arrive during prosperity. It arrives during pressure. When inflation accelerates, when taxes rise, when rules change faster than laws, when exceptions become normal, that's when ownership reveals its real nature, because real ownership gives you options. And systems in decline cannot tolerate options, so they remove them quietly. Look at what happens during every major crisis. In wartime, governments seize factories, land, and production capacity temporarily. After the war, much of it never returns. In economic crises, banks are protected first, depositors second. In social unrest, assets are frozen before courts get involved. The order never changes. Control precedes justification. This is why modern systems no longer need overt confiscation. They don't need soldiers knocking on doors. They need compliance frameworks, regulations, licenses, permits, environmental rules, zoning laws, financial reporting requirements. Each one sounds reasonable in isolation. Together, they form a web, and that web tightens when pressure rises. Consider small businesses. People think ownership means freedom, but miss a permit, miss a filing, miss a compliance deadline. The business shuts down. Ownership ends, not because of failure, because of noncompliance. Now scale that logic up. Property owners must comply with tax authorities, housing codes, energy regulations, zoning boards, and municipal rules. Failure in any category creates leverage, and leverage is power. This is why ownership today feels permanent, until it doesn't. The system doesn't attack ownership during calm periods. It waits. Because ownership becomes most vulnerable when people are afraid to lose it. Fear makes people comply. Fear makes people accept conditions they would never accept otherwise. History shows this clearly. After World War II, many European governments imposed wealth taxes and property controls. They weren't framed as punishment. They were framed as rebuilding. Reconstruction required sacrifice. Sacrifice required compliance. Ownership became conditional on contribution. Those who resisted were labeled selfish. Those who complied lost quietly. The same thing happened after financial crises. In 2008, bailouts protected institutions. Homeowners were told contracts must be honored. Ownership was respected, except when it wasn't. Foreclosures surged, banks were rescued. Ownership flowed upward, again, because systems don't protect ownership. They protect structure. Now look at the direction of technology. Digital identity, digital currency, digital assets, digital records. Everything is becoming legible to the system. Visible, trackable, scorable. This isn't about efficiency, it's about enforceability. When everything is digital, everything is conditional. Your access to money, your access to property, your access to services. And once access replaces ownership, power becomes absolute. You don't need to seize, you just deny. That's the future being built quietly. Not announced, not voted on. Implemented during emergencies. Emergencies justify acceleration. Acceleration removes debate. And debate is the last defense ownership has. People often ask why governments tolerate inequality. The answer is simple. Inequality isn't the threat. Independence is. A population that truly owns assets can resist. They can wait. They can refuse. They can leave. A population that rents everything, housing, money, access, cannot. They must comply to survive. This is why ownership concentrates during collapse. Not because elites are smarter. Because the rules favor proximity to power. Those closest to the system retain control. Those farthest from it lose theirs. And the most dangerous illusion is believing laws alone protect ownership. Laws change, interpretations change, enforcement changes. Ownership that depends on stability disappears when stability ends. That has been true for thousands of years. From Rome to France to Russia to modern financial states, the system doesn't need to abolish ownership. It just needs to redefine it. From something you control to something you are allowed to access. That's the shift happening now. Quietly, legally, incrementally. And once it's complete, people will look back and wonder when ownership actually disappeared. The answer will be uncomfortable. It vanished slowly, while everyone was distracted. If you want to understand these patterns before they fully lock into place, if you want history explained honestly, without comfort or false optimism, subscribe. Not because fear is useful, but because understanding how power actually works has always been the only defense ordinary people ever had.